Hi, I hope I am finding everybody in good spirits tonight, staying safe and warm. So, tonight we're going to study um, lesson two, and we're going to be going into God's covenant with Noah all the way through to the Egyptian bondage. And we're going to be going through the third dispensation, which is basically the human government. Um, So, what we're going to start off with, I know we talked about Noah the last time, how he built the ark, um, and eventually they came on dry land, and how there was a lot of wickedness, and that's what caused the flood. So, we're going to start off with God's covenant with Noah, and the dispensation of conscience was a failure and ended up in judgment, and that was due to the fall of Adam and Eve. The human government dispensation, which means that man was now responsible for governing the earth for God, was then ushered in. After the flood, Noah's ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, which is 500 miles away from his home in Mesopotamia. He came to a redeemed and cleansed earth. Noah was to start a new life just as we do when we receive the Spirit of God in our hearts. Old things are passed away, and behold, all things are new. Noah had to put everything he possessed into the ark. Noah had put everything. Now, in return, the world was his. 1 year and 17 days after they entered the ark, Noah and his family came forth from the ark, built an altar, and offered burnt offerings unto the Lord. With this first act of worship, of putting God first, God was well pleased with Adam, descendants of Noah. After Noah had made his sacrifice to God, a covenant was made between them and with the following provisions. God would not curse the ground anymore or destroy any living thing. Noah and his descendants were to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And that's what we find in Genesis 9:1, where it says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." Man could now eat of the flesh of every living thing, if the blood was drained from it, along with all green herbs. The law of capital punishment was established. Whoever sheddeth man's blood, by man should his blood be shed. The earth should never be destroyed again by the waters of a flood. But we find in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 6 and 7, that the next time that earth is destroyed, it will be by fire. For it says in 2 Peter 3, chapter 3, verses 6 and 7, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth, which are now, by the same word, are kept in store, reserved until fire against that day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. So God gave the rainbow as the seal of the covenant that he made with man. The covenants God made with Adam and Noah have not been done away with, but we are still in force today. The dispensations of conscious and human government are for the entire Gentile world, and still today, and still continue today. Now, Noah had sons, he had three of them. From Noah's three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the world became repopulated. Noah began to practice agriculture and planted a vineyard. He drank of the fruit of the vineyard and exposed in his tent. And Ham, his younger son, did not show his father the proper respect or administer to his needs while his father was in a drunken state. He mocked him while Noah lay in this condition. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backwards into Noah's tent and covered their father. When Noah awoke and knew what his son Ham had done, he pronounced a curse upon him and a blessing upon his two other sons. Ham was to be a servile race, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brothers. Shem's descendants were also to be blessed by God. Shem was the chosen one from whom the promised Messiah would come from. Japheth was promised that God would enlarge him and that he would dwell in the tents of Shem. With their future destinies foretold, the sons of Noah disobeyed God by not going forth to repopulate the whole earth. Instead, they went forth to one place, the rich plains of Shinar, and the whole world was of one language, since they all came from the same parental home. And we read in Genesis 11:1, where it says, Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Oh, 11:1. Okay, I'm sorry. Genesis 11:1. And it says, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach into heaven. So they built a city, they built a tower, and they tried to reach it as far as they could into the skies. I guess they figured the higher they were, the better off that they would be. They would reach heaven. Once again, man was determined to have his way. And like I said, he was not satisfied to obey the commandment of God to disperse themselves over the entire world. God had made the earth to be inhabited and man to cultivate it and enjoy its fruits. But now they conspire to build a city and a tower and to make for themselves a great name. Nimrod, a mighty man who was the grandson of Ham, convinced all the people that they should begin building a great city to make a name for themselves. Some feel that he was building it for protection so that any high waters would not be able to reach them should there be another flood. This bold man sought to turn men from the fear of God and bring them into a constant dependence on his power. Nimrod's plan was to have a federation of power in the government of the world with himself as the head of it. The tower was to be the center of their religious activity, and Nimrod was to be over both the political and religious systems. Actually, Satan was seeking to oppose the plan of God for a kingdom and a church, and was attempting to establish a kingdom and a church of his own, using Nimrod to bring about his plan. Nimrod was the first idolater and the first type of the Antichrist in the Old Testament. The word Antichrist means one who is against or coming to destroy the world Christ. We read in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, and I will have to get that because it's kind of a long scripture. So just find it here in a second. So we have 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. And it says, "Now we beseech ye, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that day, the day of Christ, is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." And that's kind of like what Satan was kind of wanting to do, is put himself on a pedestal. So the nature of the Antichrist is to oppose all that is called God, to exalt himself above God, and to show the world that he is God. The only restraining force in the world today to keep the Antichrist from coming into power is the church. The descendants of Noah represent the very hour in which we all are living. In the setting aside God's way, our modern civilization is seeking to make a great name for themselves, to soar into the heavens, to create life, and to prove that there is no God. A religious leader recently stated that in this modern space age, men should forget their old-fashioned ideas about heaven and hell. The Russian astronauts told the world that they had circled the earth and nowhere did they see a God. All this is paving the way for the Antichrist. The stage is being set right now for the Antichrist to take control of this world with a one world government, a one world church, and a one world policy system, a one world metric system, and a one world language. So God confounds their language. They're all stuck in the Tower of Babel, and they decide they're going to live there. Everybody speaks the same language. But God told them, I wanted you to go and spread yourselves. I wanted you to populate the earth. I wanted you to take care of the earth. But they all decided they're going to stay in one place. So God said, I'll teach you. I'm going to show you. So instead, he goes ahead and he confounds their language and scatters them that way. So their language is confounded, and the multitude was very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod. And they began to build a tower made of burnt brick, cemented together with mortar, that it might not admit water. But we read from the Bible in Psalms 127, it says, "Except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain that built it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman worketh but in vain." So everything was going just fine until the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men were building. He saw the motive behind it and the imagination of their hearts to defy him. Then suddenly Bedlam broke loose. The masons could not understand the mortar boys. The carpenters could not make out what the architects were saying. Hysterically, panorama came that was everywhere. Everybody like panicked because they couldn't understand everybody. God resolved not to destroy them utterly, but to cause a turmoil among them by producing in their direct tongues and causing that through the multitude of those languages that they should not be able to understand one another. So no doubt all those who could understand each other separated themselves in groups. And we read that in Genesis chapter 11, verses 5 through 9, where it talks about how they since they can't understand each other, they eventually split up. So, and it says the Lord came down to see the city, which the tower, which the children of men built, were building. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they began to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, and that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of the earth. So this is the ultimate end of all the enterprises which they tried to leave God out. So on the day of Pentecost, almost 2,300 years after Babel, something equally miraculous happened. Another group was in one accord in one place when suddenly they began to speak in an unknown tongue. Not until did men hear such each of their languages that where they were born, the glad tidings of the gospel. This experience regathers all people into a common tongue. At the Tower of Babel, it was the speakers who were confused. On the day of Pentecost, it was those who were listening who were confused. So the Lord scatters everyone into a different area of the world. And so after the confusion of tongues, the Lord scattered them abroad upon the face of the earth to remote valleys, plains, seashores, islands of the sea. They retain their separate tongue given to them at the tower. It is now an established theory that the various existing languages belong to three great families, corresponding broadly to the three sons of Noah. The descendants of Ham settled largely in Africa and Arabia. The descendants of Shem, out of which the Messiah was to come, settled in Assyria, and the descendants of Josaphat traveled toward Asia Minor and Europe. The third dispensation ended once again with judgment with the dispersion. The first two dispensations received the judgment of God because of their sin. In every dispensation, God makes it very clear to man what is expected of them. There are always two courses of life to follow, and man is held accountable for which course he chooses. We cannot be careful about our choice, but remember, in every dispensation, there is only one way to be saved, and that is God's way. Regardless of how many ways to be saved man comes up with, or how many religions are started, the fact remains that there is still only one plan of salvation that we must follow to be saved. And now we're going to go into the fourth dispensation, which is the promise. And after Noah and his family, we eventually go into we find Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we have the dispensation of the promise. So this dispensation consists of promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The dispersion of the world's population is the last chapter on the human race that the Bible records. With the call of Abram, the attention is focused upon the chosen people, Israel. God now selects a man out of which to make a special and holy nation. This nation was to be a safety deposit box for God's truth, a channel through which the whole world was ultimately to be blessed. In Genesis, 3 times this channel through which the Messiah was to come is given more definitely than before. We read in Genesis 3:15 where it says, the seed of woman is going to be the race. Where it says, and I will put enemy between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. And we also find in Genesis 22, verse 18, that the seed of Abraham will be the nation. And it says, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. And not only do we have the race and the nation, but we also have the tribe. And we find out that the tribe will be through the seed of Judah. And that's found in Genesis 49:10, where it says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and until him shall the gathering of the people be. And from the tribe we will have the family of who the Messiah comes through, and that will be David. Because it later mentions that the seed of David, which is the family, in 2 Samuel 7, verses 12, it says, and when thy day be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall process out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. So at last, it is a prophecy that he should come through a virgin, and that is found in Isaiah 7:14. It says, therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So the call of Abraham, there was all 3 branches of the scattered races were soon turned to idol worship. With idolatry came its unusual consequences: a deep moral degeneracy, cruelty, tyranny, and laziness, which means no moral restraints. Thus, they basically did anything and everything. Thus, the extreme wickedness of such cities as Sodom and Gomorrah came into being. And we'll read later on in the Bibles, later on in one of the studies, that Sodom and Gomorrah, of why they were destroyed. So men began to worship the sun, the moon, and the stars, and the principle of fire, departed heroes, and even inferior animals, and gave them to the worship due only to the one true God. And we read in Romans 21, verses 21 through 25. But we also know that Abraham is later called, but we're going to read Romans chapter 1, verses 21 in through 25. And it says, because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So the people of Abraham's day were adulterers. Even his own father, Terah, was filled with this terrible sin of adultery. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were strictly admonished to teach their children about the one true God in an adulterous world. When an Israelite father sat down to eat with his children, when he was walking down the street with them, when they went to bed at night, and when they woke in the morning, he was to gently teach them these words: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And that is found in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. Which I will read from the Bible. It tells us the whole thing. Okay, so 6, 4 through 7. It says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by thy way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up. So the first 11 chapters of Genesis cover about 2,000 years, half the length of time covered by the entire Old Testament. The Spirit seems to hurry over the events at the dawn of history until it comes to Abram, and then stops and devotes 14 chapters to this one man. The reason is obvious. The father of the faithful plays an important role in the history of redemption. Through the line of Shem, God now singles out one man through whom he can work. With Abram, we are introduced to the history of God's chosen people, Israel, who were to be a witness to the entire world of the one true God, and through whom the promised Redeemer would come. So the call of Abraham was personal. We read in Genesis 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. So he was not able to take his father or any of the rest of his family. It was a call for separation. Many times we are called to separate ourselves from our loved ones and friends to follow God, but we have a promise that he will go with us, and we know that someday he is coming back for his own, that we might dwell with him forever. Our lives must be regulated by other afflictions than those that arise from the relationships of the flood and the blood. We must walk by faith, or the unclean, which God commands, and present, which basically is His presence guiding us. Our families may often wonder why we don't do the same things or walk the same way they do, but the reason is that we have received that call for separation, just as Abram did. The promise God made to Abram was as followed. 1, he would be a great nation. His seed would be as the sand of the seashore and as the stars of the heaven. His name would be great, and God would bless those that blessed him and curse those that cursed him. And we read that in Genesis 2. Genesis 12, verses 2 and 3. Okay, so 12, 2 and 3, it says, And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curse thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So God puts a covenant between him and Abram. So the call of Abram was accompanied by a promise and a covenant. And we read that in Genesis 7, verse 17, verses 10 through 14. And I was just close to there a second ago. Okay, so verse 17, 10 through 14. So it says, This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house or brought with money of any stranger, or bought with money from any stranger, which is not of thy seed. For he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised male child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. So each pledged to do certain things for the other. On God's side, he promised to bless Abram, give him a family that would grow into a mighty multitude who should inherit the land of Canaan for an abiding possession, and he would always be their God. On Abraham's side, he pledged to walk before God and in righteous obedience and devote himself and all his family and descendants to be servants of God. As a token of this covenant, every man child in Abraham's family, as well as his descendants, are to be circumcised. How thankful we are that God still makes a covenant with us, even today. God promises to heal us in our sickness, protect us from danger, and be with us in time of sorrows, and to solve our problems. All we have to do is separate ourselves from the world, live a clean and holy life, and devote our lives to his service. The best trade of our lives is when we trade our sins for his salvation. So then we go into Abraham, or Abram and his family, which I believe is his nephew Lot, that you also hear about his Lot's wife turns back, and she turns into a pillar of salt. So we have all that too. So when Abraham left his home, he took his wife and his nephew Lot. Up until this time, Lot had been with Abram in all his travels and had shared in the great wealth God had given to Abram. Now there were so many flocks and herds, the land could not contain them. But oh, the pearless of riches! Here is the first rich man mentioned in the Bible, and we no sooner hear of his riches than we must listen to the story of strife in the family. It is not surprising that the servants quarreled. The herds were so great that in the rounding up of the wandering cattle, the servants would begin to argue and fight over which cattle belonged to which master. From an occasional misunderstanding, it grew and it became a daily affair. Abram was the older and the wealthier of the two, and was the head of the family, but instead of speaking harshly to Lot, he gave him his choice. And we read in Genesis 13:8 on Abraham and Lot, how they separated. And we read that in verses 8 through 13. And it says, And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdsmen and thy herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and behold, all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as thou comest into Zoar. Then Lot chose him all the plains of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent toward Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So Lot chose to go toward Sodom. So out of the land before them, if Lot chose to go right, like it was said in the Bible, then Abram would go left. Or if Lot decided to go left, then Abram would go right. And we would expect Lot to say, "Not so, Uncle Abram, for by thy all rights you have the first choice, and I will be glad to take what is left." But no, Lot was selfish and desired to pitch his tents toward the rich, fertile, and well watered plains near the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abram took what was left, the hilly country of Canaan. In almost every respect, Lot compares unfavorable with Abram. Abram walked by faith, Lot walked by sight. Abram was generous, Lot was greedy. Abram looked for a city whose builder and maker was God. Lot made himself a home in a city built by man and destroyed by God. So then later on, Abram starts having a family. He was promised to have a child at his old age. And God had made the promise to Abram that he would make a mighty nation of him. And he believed and trusted God. However, after it had been 10 years since Abram and Sarah had entered Canaan, and they realized they were getting old, Sarah became discouraged. She persuaded her husband to resort to a custom accepted in that day of taking another wife. He consented and took Sarah's maid, Hagar, to be his wife, and she gave birth to a son, whom they named Ishmael. But it was not the plan of God to establish the covenant between his son and of the bondswoman. Abram failed to wait patiently and obediently for the will of the Lord to be done. So Ishmael became the father of a great nation, which was the Arabs, which we read in Genesis 16:15. And it says, Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. So with him being the great leader in the nation of the Arabs, there had been a continuous struggle between Arabs and the Jews ever since. There has been warfare going on consistently between these two descendants of Abram to gain control of the site of the old Jerusalem. And we read that in Genesis chapter 19, verses 14 through 28. Okay, so verse 14, and it says, And Lot went out and spake unto his sons in law, which married his daughters, and said, Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But he seemed as one that mocked unto his sons-in-law. And when the morning arose, then the angels hastened Lot, saying, Arise, take thy wife and thy two daughters, which are here, lest thou be consumed in the iniquity of the city. And while he lingered, and the men held hold upon his hand, and upon the hand of his wife, and upon the hand of his two daughters, the Lord being merciful unto him, and they brought him forth and set him without the city. And it came to pass, when they had brought them forth abroad, that he said, Escape for thy life, look not back hence, neither stay thou in all the plain, escape to the mountain, lest thou be consumed. And Lot said unto them, Oh, not so, my lord. Behold, now thy servant hath found grace in the sight of the Lord, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast showed unto me in saving my life, and I cannot escape to the mountain. lest some evil take me and I die. Behold now, this city is near to flee into, and it is a little one. Oh, let me escape there. Is it not a little one? My soul shall live. And he said unto him, See, I have accepted thee concerning this thing also, that I will not overthrow this city for which thou hast spoken. Haste thee, escape thither, for I cannot do anything till thou be come thither. Therefore thy name of the city was called Zar. The sun was risen upon the earth when Lot entered into Zar. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and that which grew upon them on the ground. But his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abram gave up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord, and he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and behold, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. So Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed with fire and brimstone. So then after Abraham went ahead and had a child that was not going to be the promised child to um, also be a great nation or promise to Abraham, he eventually has another child, which is the birth of Isaac. So when Ishmael was 13 years old, the Lord appeared again to Abram and changed his name to Abraham and his wife's name to Sarah, and informed him that Sarah would give birth to the long promised son. Sarah laughed when told she would give birth to a son, but the following year Sarah conceived and bare a son to Abraham in her old age. Abraham was 100 and Sarah 90 when Isaac was born. Isaac and Jesus were both long promised sons to be born, and both were against the laws of nature. Sarah was past the age of childbearing, and Mary was a virgin who had never known a man. And like I said, we just studied the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So about this time, 3 angels visited Abraham with a report concerning the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot was living. The sin of these cities was so very great, their iniquity called for a visible revelation of divine wrath. After learning of the impending doom, Abraham pleaded with God for the guilty cities if there should be as many as 50 righteous in them. Abraham came down all the way from 50, he came down to 10 souls. And God assured him that if there was but 10 righteous souls, he would not destroy the cities for their sakes, but there were not even 10 to be found. Even after Lot had been warned of the destruction of Sodom, he was still reluctant to leave, and God had sent 2 angels to take him and his wife and 2 children, or 2 daughters, from the city. Have some So we read that in Genesis 19 all the way through chapter 1 through 13. Okay. And there came 2 angels to Sodom at even, and Lot sat in the gate of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground, And he said, Behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, and to your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early, and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the streets all night. And he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered in his house. And he made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compressed the house around, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have two daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do you to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, Stand back. And they said again, This one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs to be a judge. Now will we deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the men put forth their hand, and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides son-in-law, and thy sons, and thy daughters? And whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxed greater before the face of the Lord, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. So God had sent angels out to get Lot and his family out of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So the Lord rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and overthrew all the inhabitants of the cities of the plain. No doubt there was a great volcanic upheave of hot lava through the beds of sulfur and bitumen that lie in this area, which would account for the fire and the brimstone falling from heaven. This volcanic ash falling on human flesh causes the flesh to change into a chemical salt. Evidently, Lot's wife not only looked back, but went back and was caught in the aftermath of the volcanic upheave. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were not only burned to ashes, but were buried beneath the lava and sulfur, and now lie at the bottom of the Dead Sea. A book has now been published about the search for Sodom and Gomorrah in the Dead Sea. Portions of the wall of the cities have been recovered, and now scientists are sure that the ancient cities actually lie buried at the bottom of the sea. And there you can actually see some remnants of Sodom and Gomorrah in some areas around the Dead Sea. I've actually been to Israel, and you can kind of see them off at a distance, some of the places that we traveled while we were over there. So one of the sins that was so great in those wicked cities was the sin we call today sodomy, which is a sin of homosexuality. Homosexuals came together as an organization on May 29th, 1965. And as they picketed the White House with banners protesting the regulation of the federal government against such practices and demanded their rights to have some homosexuality declared as honorable in military service and employment, And we see that all through the years, even since 1965. Just a lot of things in our world, how much our world has changed since then. In England, and I mean, it was going on in the Bible days. So it's something that has been around time, through the ages. So in England, homosexuality has already been legalized. Not one publisher in England will dare to print anything against this horrible, um, damnable sin. It has become a prominent all over the world, including our beloved America. In San Francisco, and it goes on. I mean, it's just basically what it's showing is there's been corruption even since the beginning of time. In the Bible, when you're starting from Adam and Eve, when Adam sinned, that was the beginning of sin that came into our lives and into man. So we read, and there was a warning in Luke chapter 17. It just kind of tells us what it's saying is basically in the time before the Lord's returning, that we're going to have all these different things, all these sins, all these different things that go against God, that are going to be even more so from the time of Sodom and Gomorrah before the Lord returns. And it's not just that, it's, other crimes and other things that happen in our world. So we're looking at Luke 17, and it just it's basically showing you and telling you like what it's going to be like before the Lord returns. (17, 26 through 30). Okay. Okay. So, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise also as it is was or likewise also as it was in the days of Lot, they did eat, they did drink, they bought, they sold, they planted, and they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Because there is now sin in the world. So basically, what it's basically telling us is, even as the angels came to warn Lot to flee Sodom, we are here to warn you to be ready for the soon coming of Christ. There is a striking similarity between the days of Noah and the days of Lot, so striking that it cannot be mere coincidence. Jesus used these two periods of history to show us that the world's conditions, as they will exist once again just before the return of the Lord. He says it in essence: watch the signs of the times. When the world conditions described before the flood of Noah and the destruction of Sodom occur again, then know that the second coming of Jesus Christ is near, even at the door. Both of these ages were characterized by eating and drinking. There is nothing wrong with eating and drinking. We must do so to survive. However, they lived only for eating and drinking. They were interested only in physical food and rejected the bread and water of life. It is estimated that we waste enough food to feed the starving millions of the entire world. The consumption of intoxicating beverages and liquor in the United States has reached portions never dreamed of before. Social drinking has become almost universal. So, with all that corruption, even Abraham was now tempted. He was tested. I shouldn't say he was tempted. He was tested. I think I went a little bit too far. Yeah. So Abraham was actually tested on his devotion with God. And there came a time where God tested him afterwards, where he was told that he needed to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, we come to a very crucial time in the life of Abraham. There was a supreme test, the trial of Abraham's life. In many a man's life, there will be one great sorrow and one great trial. Abraham's came about one night as he watched the stars, thinking how God had given him a promise that his seed would be as numerous as the stars. As he sat there that night, perhaps Abraham said to himself, "My race will be soon run, but in Isaac my seed shall be called." Yes, God is good. Through Isaac, he will bless the generations to come. Then suddenly a voice appeared and spoke. Abraham knew that voice very well. There was no doubt as to the speaker. This time he spoke not of his hopes or the increase of his race, but the annihilation of it, which he says in Genesis 21, 1 through 3. Okay, Genesis 1 through 3. Yeah. Okay. Just want to make sure I was on the right page. Okay, so Genesis 1 through 3. It says, "And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, and at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah had bore to him, to Isaac." That was the birth of Abraham. But at that time, when he heard God's voice, God told him, he says, "Now take thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and take him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. So Abraham, that goes on through chapter or till verse 14, and we read 3, and it says, And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And she said, Who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had bore unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous unto thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman, and all that Sarah had said unto thee. Hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman I will make a nation because of his seed. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, I am here. And he said, Take now thy son, thy only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up, and went into the place which God had told them. Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes, and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide here with the ass, the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again unto you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand, and a knife, and they both went up together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father? And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide him a lamb for a burnt offering. So they both went them together. And they came to the place which God had told of him. And Abram built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon thy lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing that thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered him up for a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham was actually tested of his faith. So, like I said, I pretty much read that whole story, and I imagine what Abraham thought, that he was going to have to sacrifice his son, what kind of thoughts went through his mind. But he trusted God, and he relied on God, and he knew that God would be faithful and bring him through. So from Mount Moriah, we can see Calvary. Centuries later, another procession was winding its way up the hill to Calvary. Jesus Christ was bearing his cross up the hill. Like Isaac, he is obedient. From the cross, he would not come down. It was not the nails that held him up to the cross, but his love for you and me. The things that God sometimes demands of us in his word may seem unreasonable, and we may feel that they are unnecessary. But even as Abraham might have thought that the offering of his son was unnecessary, but we must step out in faith and obey every command of the Bible regarding soul salvation if we are expected to reap the eternal rewards. And that's all I have for tonight. I hope you guys like and share this. It will help me get my videos out. Like I said, I'm just kind of reading until I can get my channel built up a little bit, and then I have some other stuff in the future once I start getting people on here, where I actually have other people to talk to except for myself, or instead of myself. Hopefully we can get this ball rolling and get into more times of sharing and more fun stuff, and just kind of build our faith and build ourselves in the Word of God, and just encourage each other and strengthen each other through the Word and through others, maybe testimonies or shares that they want to share as far as scriptures and how that they've helped them or spoke to them and stuff. So in the meantime, I guess I'll just plug along and just do Bible studies and talk to myself until I get other people in here. So I do appreciate your time and your effort of watching. Like I said, please share and like if you would please. And I will see you the next time. Be blessed. Thank you.